Good evening, Council. This is your 2-minute warning. Good evening, everyone. We will resume our council meeting. Thank you for joining us, to those who are here. So our first item is staff report, is the land acquisition and funding release for 714 Meadow Sweet Avenue. Council, are there any questions on this? Seeing none, I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Bodley, moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Hamner. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. So our next item is the 2022 Waterloo Region Community Greenhouse Gas Inventory. There's this has been prepared by Anna Ristic. Do I see her? Oh, there she is. Okay. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I understand you're going to make introductory remarks, and then there's a presentation to follow. So thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll keep this here because I know Kira's coming after me, so that wouldn't necessarily be fair to bring it all the way up. So welcome. I am very pleased to present Kira Chisholm from Climate Action Waterloo Region, Tova Davidson from SWR, and Patrick Gilbride from Reap Green Solutions, as they give a summary of our latest 2022 community greenhouse gas inventory results.
Okay, welcome, Kira. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Anna, for leaving it at my height. Oh, do I click myself to move the slides forward? Yes, okay, thanks. Okay, good evening. My name is Kira, the Plan Manager of Climate Action Waterloo Region Program, presenting as Anna mentioned with Tova Davidson and Patrick Gilbride this evening. So Climate Action is a collaboration between local organizations, municipalities, and community members focused on climate mitigation or reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Waterloo Region. We're co-led by both Reap Green Solutions and SWR as a collaborative partnership working closely with all 8 municipalities. So let's dive right into the numbers here. So as a community, we've committed to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions 50% by the year 2030. We're here today to provide another update on the progress towards this 2030 target. Understanding our progress on emissions reductions can inform decision-making and hold us all accountable to take ambitious action. So in 2022, our community emissions were 12% less than the 2010 baseline. This is only slightly higher than our 2020 inventory, which was as to be expected because of reduced travel during the COVID-19 pandemic. While 12% does show great progress to our previous 6% target, I'd also like to stress that we are not on track to reaching this 50% by 2030 target. Why is this target important? We are in a crucial window to make changes in this decade as part of a global effort to keep warming limited to 1.5 degrees. It's also a necessary milestone for our long-term target of an 80% emissions reduction by 2050. So looking at what sectors our emissions come from, we can see that transportation emissions still account for almost half of our community-wide emissions, followed closely by emissions from buildings at approximately 45%. If we look at our emissions in more detail sort of over time, we see the dip in 2020 and then that slight increase to 2022. The transportation section, which is the section in green, is further broken down to highlight the emissions by vehicle type. Passenger vehicles, including cars, light-duty trucks, and SUVs, account for nearly 65% of those transportation emissions, which is an important indicator of the need to support residents in transitioning to zero-emissions vehicles and increased use of public and active transportation. So if we look more closely at this data, we do see some improvements due to lesser distances traveled on average, resulting in slightly improved emissions for the transportation sector in 2022. However, the trend of purchasing larger vehicles is limiting progress with lesser fuel efficiency in those passenger trucks and SUVs than passenger cars. For building emissions, which is in the second largest bar in orange, which it accounts for industrial, commercial, and institutional buildings at 60% of those emissions, and residential the other 40%. And this graph shows the changes in emissions from each energy source from our baseline year to 2022. So we can see that natural gas accounts for the most significant portion of emissions from ICI and residential buildings. And then the orange bar, sort of third down in 2010. I would just want to highlight this bar as the effect of the phase out of coal between 2010 and 2015 in reducing emissions quite significantly, despite increasing demand. And then, of course, closely followed are gasoline and diesel, which are the next highest emitting sources, most of which is from that transportation category. As a reminder, Transform is our community climate action plan that outlines actions in more detail for Waterloo Region's transition to an equitable, prosperous, and resilient low-carbon community. And this strategy is supportive of us reaching our 50 by 30 and 80 by 50 targets. So how can we get back on track? Firstly, reducing emissions requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. Solutions are the responsibility of every elected official, every municipality, and every organization. We also need to encourage residents to participate in climate solutions. From this inventory, it's clear we need supportive policies and community programs, as well as incentives and strong advocacy to upper levels of government to drive less, enabled by robust public transit, and safe active transportation networks. This can be through your continued support to see the LRT Phase 2 and future high-order transit projects in your city, as well as expanded transit service to newly developed communities. This investment must be paired with the increased adoption of zero-emissions vehicles for personal and fleet vehicle and equipment as well. To support accelerated emissions reductions in buildings, we do need, again, supportive policies, community programs, and incentives, as well as strong advocacy to upper levels of government to use less energy by making improvements to building envelopes and to use energy more efficiently. This can be through the support of regional programs such as Retrofit WR and exploring similar initiatives that enable commercial buildings to decarbonize as well. The adoption of ambitious high-performance development standards and continued exploration of district energy and low-carbon thermal energy projects. So thank you for your time and attention today to learn and understand progress towards our community-wide emissions reduction and the need for accelerated action to get back on track to meeting our long-term emissions reduction targets.
Thank you very much, Kira. So I will turn it over to council to see if you have any questions of the delegate or the delegation. I believe Patrick Gilbride from REAP and Tova Davidson from Sustainable WR are here to answer any questions that, that Kira may not be able to answer. Questions? Yep, go ahead, Councillor Rowe.
Through you, Mayor. I actually can't find my question, so I might ramble, so excuse me. But I'm actually just thinking about the forecasted population increase by 2050 and sort of how that factors in. And are we looking at just electrification and those kinds of things? Or are there other considerations? Or is that something that we're going to look at like in a report similar to this and then see where we have to make changes?
Yeah, so great question. The targets that we adopted in 2018 and then reaffirmed with the adopting 50 by 30 in 2021 were absolute emissions. So they did account for population increase to reach those targets despite an increasing population, which is an important measure, is that it is not a per capita based target. So we do need to be looking at these more significant transformative actions that look at the emissions intensity of the grid to be advocating to those upper levels of government to keep the grid clean, so that as more people move into the region, that doesn't amplify those numbers exponentially. And then I think it's an important indicator of the need for really progressive transit and supportive of moving people through the city efficiently, both for our own sort of peace of mind. I don't think anyone wants to be sitting in traffic as cities continue to grow and grow, but so looking ahead at that as both a climate and for ambitious transit policies.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions? Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor McCabe. Sorry, I just have a frog in my throat at the moment. In our chambers, we've had a number of conversations about our own municipal corporate climate action plan, and you know, we've gone through in thorough detail to talk about the different initiatives that the city can take on managing its own emissions, which includes, you know, electrification of our fleet vehicles and GHG mitigation for our city-owned buildings as being two of the biggest buckets. We've also, you know, revised our pathway to 2050 to comply with net zero instead of 80% reduction. So I'm just wondering, in the short term, you know, while we're looking at something much closer in possibly the rest of this term of council or the next, what sort of enabling conditions do you need from municipal government to start turning this curve? Because we think we're doing it, but it's not reflected in the community emissions, and we obviously have to do more and faster.
I'll invite Tova and Patrick to also add anything. So thank you for the question. I think the supportive policies and that sort of ambitious things that enable residents to make changes to their homes or work with businesses to understand those decarbonization things, like how do we get more heat pumps converted in homes? How do we come in right at the right decision time when someone's AC unit breaks to make that decision to transition to a heat pump? As well as what will be coming your way in the term is the high performance development standards, to be pushing for a really high standard of those, and so that newly developed communities are prepared for to meet that net zero target for the city, but also that 80 by 50 community target as well.
Thank you for the question. I'll just look at it from the business's point of view, because that's what SWR focuses on. A lot of times we as a culture believe that we need to make sure we're making money before we think about anything else. And I think being able to enable businesses to understand that there is a intersectionality of that and to have policies to be able to support that. Because what we often see is that everyone thinks about what can we do at our home? How do we deal with this at home? And for businesses to understand that it is part of their operating best practices. The high performance building standards that are coming are looking at new build only. To be truly progressive, we need to be looking at every major renovation of every building, and our existing building stock is a much bigger challenge, understood, to be looking at that. So it could be things like mandatory energy reporting for all commercial buildings over a certain size. It could be energy reporting through utilities and all of that sort of thing to enable us to understand where the high emissions are coming from, because right now we're sort of operating with those who are eager and willing, but we don't necessarily have the information to know, you know, this kind of sector is a bigger challenge. So, and there are municipalities that do this. So New York City, for example, if you have a building over X number of square feet, your energy is mandatorily reported. You don't have a choice. It comes through the utilities. And then people, businesses, as they're choosing their locations, are able to say, I don't want to go into a location that's not efficient because it'll be expensive to operate. And therefore, I'm going to choose to move into a building that is more efficient, reducing operating costs and doing that multi-solving. But it's going to be looking at ways that we are pushing for more knowledge, more upfront awareness, and a bit of a culture of sustainability is who we are and what we truly believe in all aspects of the city.
Thank you for the question, through you, Madam Mayor. The only thing I will add, Kira and Tova said it really well, is we know this does require an all-hands on deck approach, and that, the municipalities, they also need multiple levels of government, and that's built right into Transform WR, is that we really need to advocate and work together at all levels of government and show, as there's a lot of delegations tonight, that there is public support from constituents and votes behind this. So there is the public will behind it too.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Wright? Okay. Other questions from council? My question was around the emissions from waste. I know it indicates that they account for only 1.5%, but it increased quite dramatically since 2010. And actually from 2019 to 2022. I'm just wondering if you had some information on why such a dramatic increase on the waste emissions.
Yes, thank you. Great question. Our analysis protocol continues to change as the science continues to change as well, following the best practices. So in the latest installment of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they actually increased the global warming potential of methane as a recommended amount to account for. So then the carbon equivalency of that methane gas capture went up pretty significantly as a result of that. And so the baseline for 2010 was also adjusted.
Okay. So that's methane from organics that are landfills and...
Yes, that is the methane gas capture from the regional landfill.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Largely driven by organic diversion of the green bins and organic diversion, is that?
Organic diversion, yes, as well as what organic material was previously deposited into the landfill that is sort of decomposing there and resulting in quite a large gas capture.
Okay, and thank you very much. And I just also wanted to follow up on the question that Councillor Wright asked about mandatory reporting. Because we used to have mandatory reporting of buildings did we not, in Ontario, over 20,000 square feet?
So there used to be a federal government policy where there was, and I don't know if it was provincial, good question, I'll go and look that up now, but that there was over a certain size, and it was much larger, that buildings had to report their energy. It was never converted to greenhouse gases, so it was a mandatory energy reporting. And for things like our emission factors, a lot of people will think about the fuel switching to electricity being important, and that's because of this emission factor that Kira was talking about with landfill. Natural gas is primarily methane, 85 times more potent of a greenhouse gas than carbon, so to be doing things like moving away from that. But that mandatory energy reporting, I'm not sure is still active. I will look into that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. And I guess if assuming that we don't have any mandatory reporting, I guess my question to staff would be, have we looked at that, or do you have a sense of what might be involved if we were to look at policies around that, such as Tova, or for anyone to answer, you indicated that in New York City they have this, so I don't know if there was other examples of Canadian municipalities that have implemented anything like that?
To you, Mayor, that's a really good question. I don't think that we necessarily know the answer to that at this point. I know that through planning, we've started to require the energy audits as part of new development. But in terms of mandatory energy reporting, I'm not aware of that. We would have to respond back to council at a later time once we have that information.
Okay. Is that something that when we do get to the point where we have the high efficiency standards or the green development standards in place, that might be part of it? Or is that different?
To you, Mayor, we would probably have to confirm whether or not that would include it, but we're happy to connect with WRCE, who's kind of leading the charge, and get some additional information as to whether or not that would be included as part of that process.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Tova, you looked like you had something you wanted to say.
just thinking it through, I haven't seen them yet. We're doing a consultation next week with it to take a look at the high performance building standards proposals. I think probably not, because the energy reporting is ongoing, not at the point of development. So the city staff do great work to talk about the modeling of how it should be operating, but we know that most buildings do not operate at the efficiency level that they're designed to. And so having that reporting is about the operations post-construction or post-renovation. So probably not, but I don't want to say for certain either.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wright.
I just wanted to answer your question for you. It's OREG 506 that requires energy reporting to the energy and water reporting and benchmarking to the Ministry of Energy, and then but that's literally just energy and water. They don't do the GHG, but the City of Toronto has a bylaw where they require energy and water reporting, and then they do the conversion to GHGs, and it's in a bylaw.
Okay, well, there you go, Anna and Sandy. You've got, Councillor Wright did some of your homework for you. So thank you very much, the three of you, Kira, Patrick, and Tova, for the work that you're doing on behalf of the community. I have to say, you know, reading through this report, and I've, you know, heard it when you came to the region, but, you know, seeing it kind of laid out in, well, black and white in such stark format, it is really daunting to see that we have, you know, we're quite frankly nowhere near the where we need to be in terms of reducing community emissions. And, you know, we look forward to continuing to work with your organizations and to work with our staff and other partners in the community to continue to work to convince people to you know, to play the role, play the part that they need to play, in addition to what we need to do as a city to continue to drive down the GHGs and the methane emissions. So thank you very much for continuing to lead the work on this. So we have 4 delegations who are here to speak with respect to the community greenhouse gas inventory. And the first one is Alex Latta. So Alex, welcome to the city. If you want, you can adjust the podium. I think it's over to your left. There's a, okay, all right. And then you can.
Because you can hear me?
Yep,
Can you hear
there,
me?
the button's on. And you have 5 minutes, so thank you
Great.
for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to address you this evening. I'm not a Waterloo citizen. I live in Kitchener, but I work at Wilfrid Laurier University. I'm also a cyclist in this city, appreciating some of the new infrastructure. I'm a climate advocate on campus, and as an extension of that work, I'm also a member of the Waterloo Region Climate Collaborative, which is a loose network of organizations that has recently formed to try and increase our level of collaboration on this issue. As you've seen, this report, you know, celebrates a bit of progress, but also sounds the alarm in terms of being on track to meet those targets that we need to meet if we're going to make our contribution to keeping our planet below that crucial level of 1.5 degrees of warming. So I consider Waterloo Mayor and Council to be one of our leading local governments in responding to climate change. So I'm not going to sort of hammer away with the message that things need to be done. I mean, I do want to encourage you to do more, and more does need to be done. But instead, I want to address a bit of what I see as a sense of urgency around, and we've already heard a little bit about that, I think, mobilizing citizens and increasing the level of collaboration around this issue. And the reason why I think this is so important is that you know, progress on this issue can be fragile. At the beginning of May, I was in Vancouver and had the opportunity to reconnect with an alumna of our Global Studies program at Laurier, who now works for the City of Vancouver's Climate Change Unit. And she was sharing her frustrations since the change in city leadership there in October 2022, from a council that was pushing staff to be ambitious and to set out, you know, really groundbreaking plans, to a council that's reining staff in a bit. And in particular, you know, a really ambitious plan to raise a new funding stream for climate measures by introducing fees for on-street parking in residential areas. So really a game changer in terms of funding, but also a game changer in terms of how people think about their city. And needless to say, that was not popular and was one of the first things that the new council jettisoned. Last week, we learned that New York's rollout of congestion pricing, which was to be the first of congestion pricing in a major North American city, was being placed on hold indefinitely due to the measure's unpopularity with voters. I mean, that wasn't the stated reason, but we know that was the reason. And then last week we saw in European Union elections a major blow dealt to the parties, the political parties that have been key to an ambitious climate action policy framework in the Union. We are hardly immune to these kinds of political headwinds. The passage of Bill 185 and the pending removal of Waterloo Region Planning Authority potentially threatens our ability in this region to prevent more urban sprawl. These and other provincial decisions are a huge setback for climate action, tying the hands in some cases of local governments. And so it's important to mobilize the citizens that we know are out there and we know are concerned about this issue, to mobilize them and to collaborate with them. We've had key moments to do that mobilization around the Transform Waterloo Region Action Plan, the 50 by 30 campaign, the regional official plan process. These have been really important for generating momentum, getting people engaged. This greenhouse gas inventory, even though it's just a report card, should be another opportunity to do that, to reconnect with people and revive the conversation. City of Waterloo has advisory committees on sustainability and active transportation, and presumably these are dealing with climate issues. But are there other ways that the city can harness the energy and enthusiasm of the community organizations and individual citizens who want to see more progress on climate change? Are there ways the city can communicate better about the efforts that you are making, both within and beyond your own corporate climate action and adaptation plans? Are there ways that the city and
I don't want to interrupt you, but you've got about 50 seconds left.
Okay, I'm wrapping up. Are there ways that the city and the universities can collaborate more so that you get more support from research and student engagement? In sum, there are many of us in the education, research, nonprofit, advocacy sectors, and business sector as well, who want to support you to take the most dramatic kinds of action that are needed in order to meet this challenge. And so this is a call to keep those channels of communication open and to open new ones. Help us support you to be ambitious with the important and sometimes politically unpopular decisions you need to make on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Oh, if you just want to stay there for a second, and I'll ask if council has any questions for you. Does the council have any questions for the delegate? No, thank you very much for coming in. One quick question is, because we do collaborate, we do like to collaborate, particularly with our post-secondary institutions, and certainly Sandy Little, who's our strategic initiatives, who's leading the our actions with climate change, and that we have a collaborative, what's it called, City Hub?
It's
with
the City Hub, which I'm also involved in. So I was in this chamber for the presentations this year.
Okay.
And definitely, yeah, I mean, that
So
kind of thing.
my question
yeah.
to you though was like, do you have some ideas on like, and if you have some ideas, you don't have to give them to us tonight, but
Yep.
certainly feel free to work through Sandy or,
Perfect.
contact council directly, myself or the rest of council, like if you have like some specific ideas, because I think we're always
Yeah.
open to looking at other solutions, other research, pilot projects, et cetera. So staff are probably, I know we need to be
Yes.
careful about how much we have a certain amount of capacity, but if you
course,
have
yeah.
specific ideas around, mobilizing residents and things like that, we certainly know that this is a significant challenge and it requires an all of community response. So please feel free to share those solutions or ideas with us.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. The next delegate is Kenneth Epps. Thanks for joining us tonight, Mr. Epps. And you have 5 minutes as well.
Okay, thank you for allowing me to speak to you this evening. And I have written remarks just to keep within the 5-minute limit. The other thing I want to start or to mention right away is, although I have never met Alex, my message is very similar to his, so some of my remarks overlap. On the occasion of the tabling of the greenhouse gas inventory report, I'm here today to express the interest and concern that I believe many Waterloo residents share about the city's response to the climate emergency. I speak in a personal capacity, but there are others here who support my remarks. I also would like to note that I am a member of Seniors for Climate Action Now, a group of more than 600 seniors across Ontario working to mobilize seniors to advance climate action based on social justice. A key takeaway of the inventory report is that we are not on track for the region's commitment to reduce greenhouse gases to 50% below 2010 levels by 2030. We've heard that already. The report thus joins a multitude of reports on provincial, national, and international efforts that show we are not on track to meet GHG reduction commitments at any level. Canada is among the states most responsible for GHG buildup, yet we are far from meeting our reduction responsibilities. In spite of the UN Secretary General's regular code red warnings on climate, and in spite of our direct experience of extreme weather events, such as the late spring heat wave forecast for this week, there are still too many of us continuing to do what we have always done. As only one example, it is apparent that in Waterloo region, we cannot continue our level of dependence on private internal combustion automobiles, since these produce a significant portion of the GHGs in the region. I have learned many things in the 4 years I have been a member of SCAN, that's the seniors group, but two things stand out for me. First, climate action is needed across Canada by multiple methods, including committed public participation supported by all governments, because they have the tools and capacity to provide the necessary leadership. The second learning for me is that there are bad actors in the climate emergency, not just those avoiding participation in saving the planet, but also those deliberately working to confuse, divert, or block climate action. We all know who these actors are: the fossil fuel industry, the banks and pension funds, the political parties, and governments that deliberately play down the climate emergency, all that profit from digging the hole deeper. And we cannot pretend that they will eventually go away. I raise these learnings because both reinforce my request to you, as municipal government representatives, to commit to deeper climate leadership in Waterloo by better engaging Waterloo's residents in meaningful action in our community and beyond. The growing climate emergency demands more action from an informed and committed local population pulling in the same direction. At the same time, municipal level action in Ontario needs to push past the resistance and blockages of the bad actors, including a provincial government that has an appalling record on climate and the environment. In my view, the record of Waterloo City Council suggests it is well placed to take on this role. At a minimum, City Council could call for more frequent updates.
You have 1 more minute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More frequent updates of the GHG inventory report to keep public attention on local reductions. It could go further to identify and even implement the bylaw changes necessary for effective climate action in the city. Waterloo also has plenty of technical expertise to support projects that could better engage Waterloo residents and advance our GHG reduction goals. I urge Council to consider drawing on this expertise to support and advance highly visible pilot projects, such as the widespread installation of heat pumps to replace and reduce the use of natural methane gas. Such projects could not only serve to raise awareness of the many paths to GHG reduction, but also to provide much-needed wins in local efforts to achieve our climate goals. I thank you for your attention.
Perfect timing.
Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much. Questions from Council. Councillor Vasek.
Through you, Mayor McCabe, thank you for your presentation. I think it's a combination of your two presentations so far that's making me feel both completely demoralized and also like it's a real call to action, which is great. But I think what stands out to me most, and tell me if I'm interpreting your two presentations wrong, you can just nod back there. He can speak on behalf of you, both of you. Or this way, that's fine if I'm wrong. But a lot of what you're asking for is you're asking for tangible things like more frequent reporting and other things, but also a consciousness raising, really, to get people behind a cause that people have been consciousness raising for decades. And still people are not on board, and maybe it's because of the bad actors. But I think for the most part, people aren't bad actors. So I'm curious a bit from you, but I'm also curious a bit from our communications department. If Waterloo were to do a better job of engaging the public, and I think Waterloo does a really good job, and I'm not sure if it's the engagement necessarily that's the barrier, although that can always be done better, but I think there's some other things that are the barrier, and I can't quite figure out what they are. Because is it that things are more divisive now since COVID? Maybe, but people weren't buying in before either completely to the extent that they needed to, and people were resisting the idea in Vancouver to have on-street parking, paid parking, you know? Like there's so much resistance to it when it creates some sort of inconvenience or need to shift. Anyways, I'm curious for your thoughts on what might be the barriers to people even allowing themselves to have their consciousness raised about that. So I'm curious about that from you, and I'm curious from staff, you or communications, about how we might think about some other ways that we can engage people differently to get them on side, even if it's just that domino effect of how do we push down one more domino, for example.
That's a very big but very good question. I guess my own view is that we've also got to present the climate emergency response as an opportunity to do things better. For example, in our current heat wave, we're going to have a real threat to a lot of seniors, for example, because of the impacts of the heat. And a lot of people live in apartment buildings that have no air conditioning or ways of dealing with the heat, where we know that heat pumps deal both with providing heat and air conditioning. So there's an opportunity there to change things around to deal with impacts of the climate emergency that also help reduce greenhouse gases. So I think we have to emphasize things like that show that there are benefits that can emerge out of how we respond to the climate emergency. But that is only one part. The other is we do have to deal with the people that are giving us misinformation. And I think this is where there's opportunities for although governments have struggled to get the respect that they're due, I think there is an opportunity there as well to use the powers that you do have to convince people that the opportunities are there and we can move forward together to deal with these many aspects of the emergency.
Thank you.
I probably said too much.
No, that's, you don't, no, stay there. There may be other questions. I was just going to ask if staff had response to Councillor Vasic as well.
Sure, through you, Mayor, to Councillor Vasic. So it's definitely a very good question in terms of how do we kind of raise awareness and raise consciousness within the community. As Council knows, we have been in strategic initiatives very focused on establishing our policy framework from a corporate perspective. But now is the time, now that that policy framework is robust and in place, there's an opportunity for us to shift our focus more on the community side. So what are we doing on the community side? Well, a couple of things. We're working really closely with corporate communications in terms of ensuring that we have a little bit more of a stronger presence as part of our website. So the redesign is currently in progress right now. So it'll be kind of a one-stop place where people can go to find out what is Waterloo doing when it comes to climate change. Because right now our information is buried, I think, with water quality and with other types of environmental pages. So we're working with corporate communications on that. Another piece we're doing is we're also trying to build capacity internally to do more of the community type work, knowing that strategic initiatives is still a fairly new division and pretty small, what's a way that we can have a bigger impact? And one of the ways we can do that is by working with divisions across our city. So we're working with communications, we're working with other teams in order to kind of build that capacity. We're working with our Ready team in terms of some of the work that we're doing also as part of the strat plan, which is kind of nice because we've got those levers that we can pull. So it's about kind of getting creative when there's just two and eventually three of us. We'll be able to kind of continue to work with other divisions. We're working with IPPW in terms of, you know, some other opportunities on the strategic plan. And by doing that, we can continue to kind of build that awareness and that consciousness. But the other piece is continuing to be involved as part of climate action. That's the real piece, and that's where we'll get the greatest impact, is by working with climate action, working with sustainable, working with REAP, and working with the other area municipalities in order to get a higher impact within not just our community, because obviously climate change is something that it's extending beyond our municipal border, but working with all of our communities, whether that's our academic community, our business community, it's all of these communities combined.
Thanks. I want to have like a long conversation about this, but I won't do it now because Councillor Bodley has a hockey game to get to tonight.
Well, now that just has made me think of 10 more questions. No, did you have a follow-up, Councillor? I just wondered, in addition to the very good answer that you just provided, Sandy, like neighborhood, I think in terms of some of the mobilizing citizens, just wondered if you could touch on briefly what you're thinking of or what you may have planned for some of the through the neighborhoods teams, if I could put you maybe a bit on the spot. And sorry, does anyone have another question for the delegate? We can let you sit down if you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, excellent question and not on the spot at all. We have several things lined up with the neighborhoods group. They've really been fantastic. So the first one, which ties in really, really well to what the delegates were saying, and which I'm really glad everyone is on the same page as, is we are working on a long-term information sharing strategy with the neighborhoods, because they have several different outputs to get directly to people. And we recognize that isn't necessarily all of the people in Waterloo, of course, but it's a good segment to start with. So we've been working on them on using their existing channels and to efficiently send out information that is timely. So we send out information, for example, about air conditioning and vulnerable neighbors right in the summer. So that might be something that we send out on a week like today, on a day like today and this week. Or sending out information about heat pumps when there's subsidies available through the provincial government and federal government and different things like that. So we are working with them quite closely on that. We are also preparing a small grant program to encourage more local action and to really get people more involved in what they can do on the community level as well in that sense. And I just wanted to make a quick note in terms of motivating people in general. We've had the opportunity to do some really great work with the different universities and some different student projects on what motivates people. And by and large, when we're talking about residents of any city or any municipality, it isn't necessarily that they're good and bad actors. They're just people who are just trying to live their lives. So they're not necessarily making decisions based on is this good for the climate or not? Is this in my budget? Is this the easiest decision I can make when I need to get to a hockey game and I can't do all this research in advance? And things like that. But that's a really useful perspective to have as well, because a lot of successful actions that have happened in other cities have taken that mindset and said, okay, how can we get people to do what we would like them to do? How can we get people to do things that will reduce GHGs in a way that works for them, and to work with them and with how humans think and with how people's lives work and not against them.
Thank you for that, Anna. And I do want to assure people that Councillor Bodley has a cargo bike and he's going to take his hockey bag on that, right? Anyway, thank you very much, Anna. So moving back to the delegations, Greg Mikolenko is here as well. Thank you for joining us this evening, and you have 5 minutes as well.
Good evening. I live on Menno Street in downtown Waterloo, and I can assure you I'm more senior than the seniors you've just heard. I'd like to commend the council and the staff of the City of Waterloo. I was active in the group trying to stop the boneheaded development out in Herbville called the Donut Hole, that was taken to the local planning appeals tribunal. And I was a participant, which meant that I couldn't speak out, but I submitted a written report, which I'm very happy was almost identical to what was brought forward by the City of Waterloo. It lasted 22 days. It diverted an enormous amount of staff time. It cost much for hired assistants too, with some technical matters, and you won in the end. And that has earned you enormous respect for people in many technical areas of the environment and of planning. That gives us great confidence that you'd be able to move forward well on climate change matters. One thing I'd like to note is I recently read an analysis of how people go to work in different countries. There are 3 major ways: walking, public and transit and conveyances, and cars. And of 80 countries, 2 of them were completely different than all the rest, and that was Canada and the US, dependent 95% on automobiles and to get to work, and the kinds of subdivisions and areas they lived in. So I understand very, very well how difficult it will be for what you're doing, but I have great confidence that you'll be able to do it. I dearly hope that the Conservative movement in Canada and in Ontario can come to its senses and start doing things right. There's a journal called The Corporate Knights, that's knights as in green shining armor, and there's an interesting article there by Scott Gilmer, who says he's a member of the Conservative movement in Canada. At first, we conservationists argued that climate change did not exist. Then, drowning in data, we retreated to, it exists, but it is not man-made. After that, we fell back to, it may be man-made, but it is not necessarily harmful. As global climate disasters increased, we retreated to, okay, it is bad, but there's nothing we can do about it. This brings us to today. The Conservative movement takes one more futile step backwards and declares, fine, something might be done, but it would be too expensive. It is possible that in the very near future, we will finally reach the terminal phase of this debate and announce that, in the face of the catastrophic costs of not doing anything, we clearly could have afforded to do something, but now it is too late. There's a great deal of truth in that, but I'm glad to see that it's being recognized by those who follow those well-established political traditions in Canada. About 20 years ago, I went to the Urban Heat Island Summit held in Toronto. It was a 3-day workshop and conference event. It was a beautifully arranged thing by Sheila Basra, the late and much respected Chief Medical Officer of Health. What really stood out at the conference was the selection of amazing work that had been done in various places. So these were reports on brain waves and hard work that paid off. And I think that there may be something that could be done here to have a couple of days with on the various issues, get the public involved. There are enormous resources in this city. And for instance, one of the finest reports.
1 minute.
One of the finest reports was from Sacramento, which managed to lower the temperature in the city by shading parking lots, making it mandatory to have reflective roofs, by getting rid of black asphalt and a lighter color, and so on. And there's, I'm sure, many success stories that can be brought in and make it a public event, perhaps even have a pilot project plan to take a neighborhood and get it into the heat pumps and all those other features that we need to do. So go with it. We'll all be behind you. I can assure you that.
Thank you, Mr. Mikolenko. I lost your name here. Thank you very much for coming in and for your comments. Is there anything from council? Any questions from council? I do want to acknowledge and thank you for the very kind comments you made about the staff, and particularly the technical staff in our planning department, who worked very diligently on the hole in the donut work that you referenced. And yes, we were we were very grateful and relieved that, I don't know, we may be one of the few cities that has won at the OLT. Would that be fair to say, Mr. Ormson? But because of the quality of the staff that we had working on that, and I think that it is a testament to our planning staff, but also really important for the community as well.
It was a stunning victory, I can assure
So there you go. We like to surprise at Waterloo sometimes, right? But thank you very much. We'll make sure those comments are passed on to the staff who are responsible for that good work. Our next delegate is Marianne Cassidy. Welcome, Marianne. And feel free to adjust the podium or the microphone as you
Take
need.
my mask off for a moment.
Okay, and you have 5 minutes.
It's confusing, isn't it, for some?
Oh, no, it's all, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
So you have 5 minutes as well. But if you
Okay,
need to.
I'll be probably much briefer than
Okay,
the
if you need
others.
to adjust the microphone, you can,
Can you hear me?
there we go.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for this opportunity for allowing me to address you this evening. I was invited to a group on Friday, and we came up with some great ideas. And I'm speaking to you as a concerned resident of Waterloo and citizen. And I support bold climate action to ensure a safe climate future for Waterloo region and future generations. In 2019, this council declared a climate emergency because it threatens our collective future. And to mitigate this risk, it is imperative to reduce emissions, as we have all acknowledged, 50% by 2030 in hopes of a safer climate future. And this council adopted the 50 by 30 target based on current climate science. And as we all know, extraordinary efforts are required to meet our 50 by 30 emission reduction targets. However, a recent report, as has been acknowledged from Climate Action Waterloo Region, indicated that we are not on track at all to meet this target. So strong leadership and bold science-informed actions are required to reverse this trajectory and get Waterloo Region back on track. And I too have written all hands on deck are required, and I chuckled when you guys said that. So hats off to you. So I propose a climate action community symposium during the fall to engage community members and serve as a catalyst for widespread community action. And the symposium must be accessible in order to guarantee active engagement of the community. So I was thinking that it would be very almost festival-like. I don't know if people have seen the Oceana, what they did in the spring with the Supreme Court, and they had messages projected. So to involve groups like Lumen, to have artists involved, to have community engagement through workshops so people have challenges, to understand the harms of plastic and how it's related to the climate crisis, to understand or challenge them to change their driving behavior, and to just really engage them and have youth engagement and do it in a fun way so there's no shaming. So that's what I'm hoping, that over successive meetings over the summer, we can maybe come up with something, and maybe these three groups would be interested as well. But I'm really motivated to get this happening for fall, and I don't know. I believe there needs to be a consciousness shift with people, and I think people really get stuck in their habits. And I think they know the right thing to do, but people have habits that need to change. And maybe to have a week-long event that eventually would evolve into a month would really do something wonderful, and it should be celebratory. And I know our MP Bardish had said that Waterloo is a great example, and all of Canada needs more of Waterloo. So maybe this festival could be something that could be duplicated, and our milestones that we create would be a great example for the rest of Canada. But anyway, that's what I had to say, so.
Okay, thank you very much, Marianne.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
Council, I don't know if you had any questions for her. I think ideas like that really take someone who is really interested and motivated, and you know, I think sometimes some of the best ways to start something like that are an interested group of citizens who want to take that on. So you know, I think if that's something that you're interested in doing, we would certainly encourage you to, you know, to start. And
It's a group endeavor.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
would
yeah,
require a lot of work and support and, yeah, absolutely. But it would be really exciting to pull it off and do something that may affect change among people in terms of their habits, because I think it's pretty tricky to get people to change their habits.
Yeah, and maybe it's something we can, staff can take offline in terms of just, you know, when we do have like we have a number of, like we had open streets just on the weekend and things like that, that maybe there are places there for information sharing, similar to what you were just talking about earlier, but certainly gives us something to think about. But I certainly would encourage you, I mean, there's a very interested group of residents who are here with us tonight. It might be something you want to follow up with them directly, but, so Councillor Wright.
Thanks. Marianne, I just wanted to also offer to connect you with some people in my neighborhood who are interested in a similar initiative.
Oh, neat.
So maybe we can connect
Sure.
after this meeting. Thanks.
Sure, great.
Okay.
Sounds like you're getting the start of an organizing committee, so.
Perhaps, we'll see. Anyway, thank you.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your interest in it and your concern about the subject. And to everyone who spoke and everyone who's here tonight, you know, we've heard a few times that it really does take an all hands on deck and a community-wide approach, and certainly that I think council is very aware of that, and staff through Anna and Sandy who are sitting here, but also through the work that staff are doing across the organization. I think we are very aware of that and looking for ways to continue to make progress. So, and we do need residents like yourself and everyone who's in here tonight to continue to keep pushing us. And we will look to continue to provide updates on these important issues. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Have a good evening.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were asking me. Okay, so council, we do have a recommendation here that we receive this report. I'm looking for a mover and a second. Yes, go ahead, Councillor Bodley.
Thank you. Happy to move it with a comment at the risk of missing my hockey game. Thank you for bringing that up, Councillor Vasic. Through you, Mayor McCabe. I want to thank everybody for coming this evening, and I think some of the key takeaways here are, for me, in reading the report, is how significant and how laser focused we need to be on the buildings and transportation side of things. Like, that's where the vast majority of our emissions are coming from here. And the second piece was around why it is incumbent upon us at the City of Waterloo to show leadership on these issues. And so when I think of that, when it comes to buildings, I know it was alluded to the high-performance development standards that are coming and how keen this council is to advance that. Looking at the changes that we've made to our own green building policy just this year. Some of the voluntary energy mapping requirements we've been requiring of developers that have been coming into council. I'd encourage everybody to check out Generation Park out in the west end of the city for all of the sustainable development standards that were applied to this forthcoming employment park in Ward 2. On the transportation side, I know we're advancing an EV charging strategy. We have significant commitments when it comes to active transportation. We've been leaders when it comes to transit-oriented development. But, you know, as Anna alluded to, people are really just trying to get by, and they make decisions that are in their own interest. So I think that's why, particularly in a sloganeered, axe the tax type world, it's so important for us to continue to show leadership at the City of Waterloo. We need to, as Councillor Wright alluded to earlier in our meeting this afternoon, we need to make the business case on asset management and climate change and why it's going to cost us more money to maintain our assets if we don't do anything about this. We need to make the plea this evening, as referenced. I have a hockey game tonight, so I drove my car in today because I have my hockey bag with me, and I don't own a cargo bike. But normally I would e-bike in here, and I have a much more beautiful start to my day when I get to enjoy my ride into City Hall and get to ride through Waterloo Park and enjoy the beauty of the city of Waterloo that I didn't get to do today in the same way because I had to drive here because I have a hockey game. Hopefully that makes up for it later. But we need to make these cases to people and urge them to understand why this is so important. I look forward to the community conversations on environmental sustainability and climate action that we are going to be having this Thursday. That's going to be a really wonderful event. And I really just wanted to say thank you to everybody for being here this evening, continuing to do the work that you do in the community. And I want to lastly encourage staff to challenge council to continue to be bold, particularly when it comes to actions that not only are reducing our corporate emissions, but that are going to enable the reductions that we need to see in the community. And I encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley. So we have this moved, and I need a seconder, Councillor Hanmer. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you again, everyone who, from Kyra, Patrick, Tova, for your continued work and leadership, and to all of the delegates and other people who joined us tonight to listen to the discussion and who do so much in our community in your own way to address these issues, and as I said earlier, to push us to continue to do more. So thank you very much. So moving on, we are at the Indoor Community Space Strategy. And we have a presentation tonight. And I'll just let everyone exit before we welcome staff to the podium. Travis McCallum and Beth Ranovich, welcome. Thank you. And Jim Bowman, of course. So welcome, Travis. We look forward to the presentation.
Council for having me here today. So I'm here to present to you the Indoor Community Space Strategy. We've had a few updates to Council in the last 2 years since I started at the city. This is my first major project that I've worked on and looking forward to more in the future, but it really represents a culmination of a lot of work from staff across the city, and I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for their input to this. There was a lot of meetings, a lot of feedback shared, a lot of collaboration, and I really appreciate the participation of everyone. So this strategy is the first step towards the modernization of Waterloo's leisure landscape, and as a strategic roadmap, it highlights key areas of action to help the city get a head start when it comes to grant applications. We mostly focus on the indoor spaces themselves, which does include ice pads, Councillor Baudelaire. And this work will be furthered by the upcoming sport, recreation, and leisure strategy. It'll detail further actions that need to be taken and provide additional data through a sports, recreation, and leisure trend study. And this trend study will go beyond examining indoor spaces and also include programming opportunities as well as outdoor sports fields. So to inform the plan, we looked at data, spoke to city staff, and engaged with the public. In terms of data, we looked at census data, standards of provision, and utilization and reservation information, which is just a really government way of saying booking rates. So when you look at these three areas of analysis, they should be considered in tandem to paint a complete picture. In some instances, we might have a comparable standard of provision for any given amenity, such as an ice pad, with many other municipalities, but demographic data might suggest that that standard won't be met in the future, and user data and booking rates can tell us that even though we're meeting these standards, we're at capacity in some areas and might need to construct new spaces or enable access to additional spaces. So staff were especially helpful with highlighting challenges they notice in the spaces they work in, concerns that facility users and the community share with them directly, and suggestions for improvement. Their expert advice provided the foundation on which many of our preliminary recommendations were based, and it really prepared us to kind of have our first round of public engagement. And that first round came in the form of a survey. We had a pretty great response rate at 544. Residents shared with us what they love most about their facilities, but also what they would like to see improved. So we took all this information we gathered and came up with a draft strategy. From there, we posted it online for public feedback in its entirety. We didn't get as much of an uptake in responses just because it is quite a long document, as you know. But we did receive some helpful feedback, heard some of their core concerns, and found that the strategy was generally well received by the public. And so to speak a little bit more on the strategy, it contains more than 60 recommendations. They're not overly prescriptive, and they offer the flexibility needed to work around complexities, such as funding uncertainty and the availability of land, as well as emerging trends across the rec and leisure landscape. And it's divided into three main areas of focus. The first being policy and organizational recommendations. The second is facility recommendations, and the third is future recommendations. So policy and organizational recommendations include all improvements that don't modify or create a physical space. They are more the rules and terms around how the spaces are used. And facility recommendations, now we're getting more into the physical side of things. They involve the structures that already exist, how we can modify them to improve community use and benefit. And future recommendations involves what we might need to build in the future to meet emerging demands and trends. And some other general steps to be more future ready when it comes to strategic planning around the provision of indoor spaces. So to begin implementation, the easiest thing to get off the ground is reviewing the key policies affecting the use of space. That includes affiliation, the facility rental discount program, and allocation. So in this case, we'd be looking at the rates that are offered, who's able to access them, and in all the spaces that they apply to. We'd also explore and monitor grant opportunities to support projects. As you know, grants become available throughout the year, and this allows us to hit the ground running and be able to respond to them quickly for hopefully a positive outcome. And this will also allow us to start the development of a larger sport, recreation, and leisure strategy to provide strategic direction over the next 10 years. So now I'd like to open the floor to questions from Mayor and Council.
Thank you very much, Travis, and thank you again for the report and for your presentation. I will look to Council for questions, and we'll start with Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I actually have a couple questions that are associated with the previous report. Just in your presentation, you were talking about emergent demands and trends, and we were just talking about climate action. And it's been very clear in all of our conversations about facilities, the focus on GHG mitigation for our buildings. There is another factor here that I'm just wondering whether you have considered in your emergent demands and trends, and that's how climate impacts like extreme heat, poor air quality days from smoke days, heat days like we're experiencing this week, potential water scarcity, 90% of climate impacts are water related. How those can be factored into our 10-year plan here, just because I'm anticipating an increased demand for indoor activity space because of those impacts. So just wondering how that might factor into your future proofing of this in this strategy.
Through you, Mayor, to the councillor. That's a great question. We have considered some GHG angles coming up with this strategy. More will be fleshed out when we do the sports rec and leisure trend study. While I agree with you that it will drive more people indoors, we're also seeing that climate change, how it affects the use of indoor spaces. We hear sometimes that using our rinks when they're taken out in the summer, it's far too hot inside to be able to enjoy it. There's some issues around condensation. The indoor turf field is also seldom used in the summer because it becomes basically a heat dome. So we're addressing some of those issues to enable more community use in comfortable settings. But also with design, we can kind of mitigate the impact that facilities have on the environment. So a little bit of a catch-22 here because providing more spaces will inherently increase our greenhouse gas footprint, but we can minimize it with newer builds that take advantage of co-location of amenities. So for example, if you have 2 ice pads as opposed to just 1, like we have at Moses Springer, there can be cost savings associated with having the same equipment working on both rinks. And if you're co-locating a pool with a rink, you can actually use the warm air removed from the rink to heat the pool. So how it could look down the road when we have newer facilities is that it could be less than it is now, even though we are creating new builds there. But it definitely will be part of the conversation when we're doing the sport, rec, leisure, and trend study.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Thank you very much for the report. Lots of good detail and lots of good direction going into it. A couple questions from your presentation, and I appreciate the policies are probably more the low-hanging fruit to get going right now, and they are things that always need to be taking a look at. I'm interested with the facilities piece on 2 fronts. Will we be able to, I think the map is a great idea to figure out what's possible, because that will also help determine what do we need to be building, whether it's art space or whether it's recreation or leisure space. But are we able to kind of map that out as well in terms of grants that might be available? You've been writing grants long enough, you know what's likely to come. I'm just curious if we have a priority list of what we might put depending on the grants that are coming out.
Through you, Mayor, to the councillor. We don't really have a crystal ball in terms of what could come down the pipeline. So our strategy is to kind of look at the entire landscape, map out the projects that are possible, and kind of base that on what the grant parameters are. Because some might be very particular in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. Some might be specifically for sports and recreation amenities, like the $200 million the province had announced in this year's budget. So we're trying to be ready for anything that could come, and as well as we can without knowing the details in advance.
You know, I appreciate the crystal ball would be a wonderful thing for everybody to have, for sure. And I know, I think just using your expertise as you come through this, you'll have 10 projects perhaps in the hopper that you know might fit. And the city staff have been very good at looking at how can we put together a number of initiatives that will solve it, whether it is for climate action, and I think that's a good piece for us to forward on. Then my final question is, as we're then moving from the recommendations for our existing facilities, will that then lead into, with the new builds, what our standards are going to be before we even go to tender or go to bid on the projects?
Through you, Mayor, to the councillor. Yes, absolutely. Like when we're looking at either renovating existing facilities or building new ones, the whole landscape can look entirely different. Like sometimes you'll notice we recommend some possibilities, like if Moses Springer wasn't an arena anymore, well, that would be contingent on if we're able to provide an extra ice pad with others at the same spot, rather than having a single pad arena, which is the least efficient form of that. So we will revise our standards of provisions going forward as that becomes more apparent. But we're also going to focus on the emerging trends piece to make sure that we're addressing community needs directly, because as much as we can compare and learn from other municipalities, I think Waterloo is usually in a position of leadership, and we might have to kind of redraw what that landscape looks like, and others might be comparing to us what they offer and go from there.
What we're doing. And I think you alluded to, my final comment, alluded to looking at and I'll talk about the sports, and I too have a keen interest in the pools and the arenas, what the different sports may be going in terms of what kind of facilities are needed, and also what might be able to be shared too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Beth or Jim, I think, wanted to respond to you as well.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to add to that we are working with our READY team around accessibility standards and around how we engage with diverse communities in our city so that we come up with design standards that meet the needs of the community today and in the future. And then we're also, as part of the sport, recreation, leisure strategy, we'll be doing a very comprehensive trends analysis, looking at both what are the demographic trends, what are the societal trends and what are the interest-based trends, and we'll be including that. And so I think the work that we do going forward into this next strategy will very much involve working with facility design and management services, with the staff that we just saw here talking about climate change, to bring that all together into a more fulsome plan.
Thanks.
Did you have a follow-up?
I do have a follow-up, actually, because you prompted another question for me. One of our challenges always is during the day use of some of our facilities. So will part of, and this may come up more in the next study that you're going to be doing, Beth, looking at, are there partnerships that might be created, whether it's with the school boards, whether it's with the universities, to make better use of some of our daytime space, so it takes a little bit of the pressure off the prime time, with prime time being typically 4 to 10 o'clock at night.
Through you, Mayor, yes, absolutely. We're always looking at how we can maximize our facilities. And I think going forward, we want to really look at those collaborative partnership-based approaches so that we can make the most of what we have and also make the most of what others have in the community.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate it that it's an all-of-community approach that's taken. It's not just the city coming up with ideas. It's really looking at the broader community to see how we can make it work. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Handmer. Councillor Bodley.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor McCabe. I really enjoyed this report. I made 2 full pages of notes in my notebook on it, so it's really great. I have a couple of questions here that are maybe comments wrapped up as questions, perhaps. So the first one was just around the indoor track usage at the rec center, and I wanted to highlight that I've heard from a number of residents over the years about how wonderful the indoor track is, the main track around the rec center. But some of the challenges that emerge with being able to use it during, particularly when the Siskins are playing there. And I know that it was highlighted in the report, but I would encourage staff to sort of think about possible ways to segment off the track so that it can be used during Siskins games without sort of conflicts with concessions and things like that. Because obviously the majority of the time that folks want to use the track is in the wintertime, which happens to be when the Siskins are playing. So I'll leave that with you. I don't need a response there. The second question that I have, you alluded to it, Travis, around Moses Springer, and it's not really about the granular nature of Moses Springer. I'm more curious about the thought process. Because throughout the report, there's a lot of references to ensuring that our indoor spaces meet the surrounding needs of the surrounding neighborhoods, and yet ensuring that we're also meeting the needs of the city more broadly. And I use Moses Springer simply as an example to note that it notes that the pool is a really well-used facility for the surrounding neighborhood. And then it contemplates potentially twinning the pad for the reasons that you had noted. So how do we think about and balance sort of the needs of the surrounding neighborhood when it comes to indoor spaces versus the broader needs of the city?
Through you, Mayor, to the councillor. And that is one of the main issues we face coming up with this strategy. Like, how do you balance the needs of the city as a whole against those of the immediate neighborhoods? And that's one of the reasons why we really stress in the strategy that going forward, when we're engaging for any particular space, to speak to the residents around there as a direct group as well, and not just engaging on Engage Waterloo Region and such. Not that there's anything wrong with that type of engagement, but we just need to think of it from more angles. It's really a balancing act. Like, when we recommend maybe twinning the ice pads, the possibility could also be like, what if we enclose the pool? So it still exists, but instead of the 2.5 months or so of use that it could get, it could be year round. So really, like, those are the answers we're gonna have to come up with, like, as we engage with the community and hear what they think on that and how we can kind of take that into account while still presenting a plan that makes sense for the city as a whole.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. And just finally, through you, Mayor McCabe. Yeah, I think it's a really, I think that's a broad challenge that we all face at the council chamber on all sorts of issues. How do you balance the needs of your ward with the needs of the city more broadly? And I appreciate it here. And I wanted to take the time to highlight the particularly acute needs for indoor recreation space on the west end of the city, given that of the 13 facilities that were highlighted, the only one of significant potential is the Herbsville YMCA. And I know that folks in the west end of the city are particularly keen to have more indoor community space options, whether it's sports or rec or arts and culture on that end of the city. And I'm really curious or interested to see what community engagement will look like around that space for the folks that live in the surrounding area. And so I'm sort of heartened by the feedback that you've given me on how we're going to weigh those two things and balance that. I think is going to be really important as we move forward there. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley. Councillor, sorry, go ahead, Beth.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to add to that our next steps, part of additional next steps will be looking at the feasibility at each of our facilities to do some of these things. So we've come up with ideas, but we need to actually sit down and look at what we can do on those sites with the idea that we need to maximize the sites that we have because land is scarce. And part of that will be in-depth engagement, as Travis said, with the surrounding community and the community as a whole. And I envision that as being potentially more like our neighborhood strategy or our culture plan work, where we're really having in-depth conversations with neighborhoods, with community members about what they're looking for in their own backyards.
Thank you very much. I know we have Councillor Vasek up, but if you would just indulge me, Councillor something that was just said sparked a question in Councillor Hanmer, so I think it's on the same.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you. Just, Beth, your comment about around the current facilities, I think Councillor Bodley's point was in Ward 1 and Ward 2, we don't have any facilities that are city-run, so it'll be a little bit different type of consultation, I think, that needs to be there. So just as long as you're separating the two. If we do it around our existing communities or facilities, we're in the same boat that we are right now.
Thank you for noting that. Yes, we'll be looking at the west side as a different approach because we don't have that access to facility space right now. But again, very focused on the neighborhood level as well as the city level to make sure that we're reflecting that balance between both and understanding that, looking at the land that we do have available and what is the best use for that area.
Thank you. Good note, Councillor Ham. Oh, sorry, Jimbo.
I think it's well to note as well that this is a roadmap for us, and when we get into the granular level, we'll be coming back to council to say this is what we think is feasible and how we engaged and what we did to engage to make the next recommendation going forward. So this is really the first real step. We need to take 1 or 2 steps before we start to run.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vasek.
Thanks, through you, Mayor McCabe. Thanks so much for all your work on this report. It sounds like you also had a little bit of fun doing it, which is good. And it is a really huge challenge, space for us as a city and then community groups and arts and creative industries. And so I have a couple of proposed amendments for my council colleagues to consider because, like you said, you're just getting started running, whatever you just said with the analogy. And then I had another analogy to build off of it, and I completely forgot it all. Anyways, hit the ground running is where I was going to say. Okay. And so what I want to do is just propose a couple of amendments that kind of will be a bit more explicitly capture what I think we want to do. And I think you would do it anyways, but because it's a written document and a strategy and a point in time to capture the idea, I'd like to just go a little bit more explicit and granular in a couple of recommendations if my council colleagues will indulge me with the suggestions and then all vote in favor. This would be greatly appreciated. So I want to change recommendation 1.3, which is engage with Waterloo's diverse communities when redesigning or designing a facility, to I don't know if, should we pull this up or should I just read it? Thoughts?
Do you have it, did you send it to clerks?
Rook's pulling it up right now, I
Okay.
think. Yeah.
We'll give Rook a minute then.
Okay, so for 1.3, I'll just provide the rationale for why. So I think we have already, to some extent, done engagement with community groups, and community groups have, and diverse communities have identified that they have specialized space needs that are not being met. And so I wanted us to move a bit beyond engage to incorporate culturally appropriate engagement, and that there is also an imperative to incorporate that feedback, which as recommendation 1.3 stands, while I believe that is the intent behind it, it doesn't say it. So that's what I'm hoping to do with 1.3. And then recommendation 3.5, which says explore opportunities for provision of art space, arts and creative industries, space for arts and creative industries. I'd just like to change explore to prioritize. And the reasons behind this are that we know that the Environics report, which was a consultation, a region-wide consultation with all municipalities, has identified that space is the second biggest need. So I don't think we need to explore that further. We know it, and so we need to prioritize it. And the word prioritize aligns with the other recommendations for ice rinks and other recreation facilities. And so I think it's also a way to signal to the arts and creative industries community that we are ready to prioritize space needs, as our document says.
Thank you, Councillor Bassick. Did Council have, I know Councillor Rowe has a couple. It's connected to that? Okay. We'll go Councillor Rowe and then Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you for your report. I really appreciate it. And I just wanted to connect a little bit to Councillor Bassick's recommendations. And it's really more of a comment, just reaffirming the need to conduct sessions with diverse community groups, specifically in the area of affordability. Community Coalition on Refugee and Immigrant Concerns conducted a needs and assets assessment a number of years ago with diverse groups in Waterloo region, and the number one issue was affordable space. So when you're having these sessions and as you move forward, I'm sure that you've already considered this, but I just wanted to underscore that there is a great need for these groups to be able to access community spaces.
Through you, Mayor.
Can I just ask a quick clarification on that? When you're saying space, are you talking like meeting space, or
Yes.
what kind of space?
Yeah, meeting
Okay.
space, community rooms. Yes.
Through you, Mayor, I think this is very high on our agenda. When Travis noted that we're going to start looking at our facility rental discount policy, one of the reasons is that that program supports a particular group of organizations, and we're hoping that we can find new approaches that make our facility spaces more affordable, because we're hearing it from groups that have used our spaces historically, who have now decided to go elsewhere. And we're also hearing it from many groups who are approaching us to use space and simply cannot afford our rental rates. So this will have to be a major point in our sport, recreation, leisure strategy. How can we find that balance between the financial costs of running our facilities and providing space so that the community can engage in the activities they want to engage in?
Can I just ask a quick follow-up to that point? What kind of, I'm just curious about the timeline for something like that, because there's a real demand for space, and like in terms of meeting rooms and that right now, and I'm not sure how long the pulling together the whole strategy just on that particular point, because these are underutilized rooms. So I'm wondering if, what your timeline is just specifically on that part.
Through you, Mayor, there are a couple things. So from the strategy perspective, we're looking at doing trends analysis, and then diving into what directions we want to go in. So that's going to take several months. But one of the things we have considered is looking at some of our underused spaces in our facilities, and could we pilot a project to provide those at a lower cost or free even to the community. So we can certainly look into that kind of approach as a, a test run to see how we can go longer term.
Thank you very much for that. I don't know, Councillor Rowe, if you had a follow-up to that. Okay, so I know we have the proposed amendments on the, they're not on the table yet, so we'll go to Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you. Through you, and this may be more of a point of order. The changes that Councillor Vasek is proposing are to the report itself, which we're being asked to approve in principle. So I'm wondering, and this is really, I'm turning to the clerk, should we actually have a third recommendation that we direct staff to adopt the recommendations proposed at council this evening? So then it's a third because we really can't change the report, but we can ask staff to do that. Okay, then when it's time, I'm prepared to make that motion.
Okay, thank you very much. And are there other questions particular to the report before we deal with that? Okay, seeing none, I just had a couple. And again, thank you. It is a really interesting read. Where was my question now? Because some of them have already been answered. Oh, so I'm curious about, because, we've talked a lot about how, Waterloo is becoming more constrained with space and land and things like that. So I'm wondering, through this process, what we have learned or what you think we can learn from other municipalities, not maybe necessarily in Canada, where we do generally have a fair bit of land, but maybe from municipalities in other countries. And I'm thinking, particularly like Europe, where space really is an issue, where they've adopted to a large degree climate change initiatives much more quickly because of their energy challenges and things like that. I'm just wondering, is that going to be part, will you look at places like that for ideas in terms of what our buildings, the buildings that we may be, and the ice pads, et cetera, might, what they may, to provide some more concepts?
At this phase of the work, we have not looked internationally. We looked at other comparable municipalities in Canada. With our sport, recreation, leisure strategy, we will be delving deeper into best practices, and I think that is where we can do that kind of work.
Okay, yeah, I'm not suggesting anyone goes on a trip to Holland or anything like that, but but if you are, I'll go with you. But yeah, I think and I haven't seen facilities in some of those other countries, but I think there's, it's fine to look at Canadian municipalities where there are examples and things, but I think in cases like this, when we really are looking at really upping our game, no disrespect to other Canadian municipalities, but when things like space and land and energy use are such a premium, I think it kind of behooves us to really look at at some other more maybe innovative models. Mr. Bowman.
Yes, Mayor, when we advanced the work on the pavilion over at WMRC a few years back, we looked at a number of municipalities of what they had and what they were doing. And we actually did a road trip to Mississauga and some of our closer neighbors and saw buildings in place that we could actually walk through and see some of their advances. So as Beth and Travis have noted, the trends, we're seeing really big trends happening, whether it be how we use our space, when we use it, and how we use it more effectively, and that's our aim and goal. So when we get into the work in terms of what we need to do from a feasibility perspective and what we can actually accomplish, we will be going probably and visiting some of these other local, not to Holland, but perchance, but I would say like maybe, places like Barrie even, or far enough away that have similar needs and similar issues, whereby we can actually see buildings in place, and we anticipate that will be part of our work going forward.
Okay,
so we want to do that kind of work.
Yeah, thank you. And just as a quick example, I had to travel to Germany economic development meetings in the fall. And when I was in one of the cities, I noticed I was taking a train, so I was elevated, but they had a soccer pitch on top of a 5-story building, which I think was a shopping mall. I couldn't quite tell what it was. It could have been an apartment building. I couldn't get a clear look at it, but they had a full soccer pitch with like netting and all that around it. And I really think, we need to look at like airspace and all that kind of stuff. So I won't belabor the point anymore, but thank you.
But I think also it's important when we visit some of these places that they've done things, is to ask them how they're being used. We have examples of places where they've put together some really neat ideas at the time, but looking back 5-6 years, they're saying they are being used. So there's that part of the equation that we'll have to address.
That's a fair point. And my other question / concern is just the part in here about the indoor tracks. I was a little surprised that it indicated that about the indoor track being, sort of I know it's a well-used facility, a well-used space, but what I've heard from we've got, I think, 5 or 6 track clubs here, is that it really doesn't meet the needs, particularly because it's surrounded by, like spectators and people but it's also not the right size. Like to have a proper track is 400 meters. I think that one's 250 or 300. There's just there's no storage, there's no, there's just a whole host of challenges. So, and when I was sharing this indoor space planning, the links to the online Engage WR and that with different groups, what I was hearing back was, the community we're big enough, we need a proper indoor track where people can train in the winter, where we can host track meets, we can bring in all kinds of, there's revenue to be made, et cetera, et cetera. So I was concerned that I saw that piece in there because I think particularly on that piece, we, it's one voice, but that's something I think maybe deserves a little more digging with our local track clubs, because I've heard that pretty consistently over the last 3 or 4 years, that's a real gap in our community.
Through you, Mayor. I think we will look at that as part of the next stage of work. I think we'll need to connect with our sport tourism folks and with other community partners to find a solution for that need. What I've also heard from our track clubs is, as an immediate response is an improvement to the track surface at WMRC, but then also the lack of facilities for other track and field sports. So even if we've got the track, we don't really have the field. So we're gonna have to look at all the community partners, the post-secondary institutions, from a sport tourism perspective to figure out how we can work regionally on that kind of approach.
Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we thank you very much for that. So we'll return to the amended recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Hanmer, for noting that. Are there comments? Or sorry, well, we first need someone to move. I guess moved by Councillor Vasic to put it on the table, and seconded by Councillor Hanmer. Do we have any comments or questions around the amended recommendations that are there? Nope, seeing none. I'll just say I'm really glad you flagged that, because when I read through it as well, I thought that was something important to highlight as well, because we know that the arts and cultural performance spaces are a real need, a real lack in our community. So thanks, Councillor Vasic, for flagging that. Okay, so we have it moved, we have it seconded. Did you have a question, Councillor Rowe? Okay, it's moved and seconded. All in favor then? That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Travis, Beth, Jim, and anyone else who contributed to this. We appreciate it, and we look forward to the next stages of this. I think you can tell there's a lot of interest around the horseshoe here in the next step, so thanks very much. Okay. So now we are into the rental housing regulation review. And we have a presentation by Grant Curlew. Welcome to the podium, and we'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, Council and members of the public. I'm Grant Curlew. I'm the Manager of Licensing and Standards. I'm joined by Michelle Lee, our Executive Officer to the CAO, and Tanya Kuruk, Senior Policy Planner.
Grant, sorry, excuse me. Could you just move closer to the mic or maybe move the podium up a little bit?
Better? Okay.
Is it, so you can pull it a little bit more towards you? There we go. That might be better.
Both who co-authored this report with me. This report is intended to formally initiate a review of the city's rental housing regulations and to seek guidance from council on what you'd like staff to explore further. The report is not intended to be an in-depth analysis on each potential program. Rather, is meant to be an overview of the various regulatory options available to the city, which may address challenges in the rental market that have been identified. The residential rental licensing bylaw was established in 2012 and most recently reviewed in 2017. The bylaw is designed to regulate low-rise residential properties and improve safety and neighborhood nuisance. Staff have received valuable feedback from both tenants, student groups, and landlords. Due to the evolving nature of the rental housing market and overall housing landscape, we believe that it may be beneficial to review the current rental licensing regulations and potentially explore additional rental programs. The report explores 4 potential programs or options, and that is the review of the current rental licensing regulations, potential short-term rental licensing regulations, potential for mid and high-rise rental building safety program, and a review of options to address rent evictions or rental-related evictions. Our current rental licensing bylaw, as I mentioned, has been around since 2012. There is a few options to explore for updates, including streamlining the current classes of license and the fee structure associated with them, exploring potential for allowance of more than 4 bedrooms in a unit, adjusting the livable floor space to bedroom floor space ratio, and other small adjustments that would allow for applicants or easier applications and more robust enforcement of the program. The second potential update we have explored is short-term rental licensing. We estimate there's currently 500 active short-term rental properties in the city of Waterloo. There are some positives to short-term rentals. They do provide additional temporary accommodations for the traveling public, but they do have an impact on the housing market and reduce the overall long-term rental stock in the city. The estimation is that short-term rentals currently occupy 2 to 5% of the total available rental units within the city. A portion of short-term rentals are already regulated through our rental licensing bylaw if they fall in the low-rise residential rental category. A short-term rental licensing program would require additional staff and specialized data collection software to operate. A mid and high-rise safety program. We estimate that there's approximately 12,500 rental units within buildings greater than 4 stories. This number has been growing. And we've seen an impact on an increased number of property maintenance and zoning complaints, as well as fire safety considerations in these building types. When a safety or maintenance issue does occur in these building types, it can often have a higher impact on a larger number of tenants. An example of this is a the loss of water to a building for several days, which can have significant impacts on the tenants. As part of a program, a safety program, building owners would be required to submit an application form, which would result in a score of the system or of the building. This would be, the score could potentially have criteria such as the building's age, mechanical systems, preventative maintenance measures, amenities such as the provision of air conditioning, and other considerations. The score would then be posted publicly, and this would allow for greater transparency for potential tenants to know what they're potentially getting into before they sign a lease agreement at a particular property. The lowest scoring properties would be subject to a comprehensive inspection by property standards and fire prevention officers. This program would require a number of additional resources to implement, with licensing fees potentially being passed on to the tenants. This chart demonstrates the increase in calls we've received related to maintenance and zoning concerns from 2019 to 2023. This increase represents a 175% increase in calls over that time period. This chart represents the increase in dwelling units that are located in apartment buildings of 5 or more stories. This is the most recent data we have, but these numbers have likely continued to grow. So as you can see, in 2016, we had 5,945 units, and in 2021, 10,330. Right, I'm going to pass it over to Michelle Lee to discuss our rental eviction regulations.
Thanks, Grant. We've heard from members of council and some members of the public as well an interest in exploring rental eviction programs, or rental eviction prevention programs, I should say. We looked into this a little bit and estimate that we probably could expect about 10 to 30 so-called rent evictions per year. It's really hard to get a clear understanding of how many potential rent evictions there are, but that's our best estimate at this point. Landlords are currently required to follow a process in the Residential Tenancies Act to put forward an eviction letter. That being said, some of them are legal and some of them are probably not necessarily in accordance with the rules that are set out in the Residential Tenancies Act. So that 10 to 30 number is an estimate that could include legal options to rent evict and also ones that are not following the proper process. A rental eviction prevention regulation would really be a permit to that a landlord would submit, or permit request that a landlord would submit to the city that would show that they are following the process that they're required to follow through the Landlord and Tenant Board. We estimate that there would be a high cost to operate the program, and there is the potential for legal challenges. There could be some organized groups of landlords that may seek to bring forward the proposal that this is a bit of a stretch in our authority. We've suggested some alternate options that we would like to explore in addition to a rental eviction prevention program. One is already underway. It's the requirement that applicants for condominium conversions demonstrate that they've notified all tenants and offered the first right of refusal to those tenants that will be affected. That's a policy that's set out in the region's official plan and something we are planning to bring forward in our official plan review and update that is coming to council on June 24th. The other item that is already underway is the requirement for applicants of demolition control permits to demonstrate that they've provided existing tenants with compensation in accordance with the rules under the Residential Tenancies Act. And again, that's a policy that was adopted in the region's official plan, and it's something that we have brought forward in the draft official plan that's coming forward on June 24th. We have also 2 additional items here that we would like to explore that we think that would have a positive impact in reducing rent evictions, and that is providing financial or in-kind support to existing tenant support programs that provide direct support to tenants. Those types of programs offer education, they provide translation services. They really help tenants who are in precarious situations navigate the landlord and tenant tribunal system. It's a recommendation that we made in our affordable housing strategy and an action that council has already approved. So we've got council's general endorsement of this action, but haven't specifically allocated any funds to it. So we're proposing as part of our recommendation to explore that further. And then last of all, there's an opportunity to provide sustainable longer-term funding to the city's multi-unit residential acquisition program. This is a program that we proposed under our Housing Accelerator Fund grant. And what it does is it provides financial assistance to not-for-profits and cooperatives to allow them to purchase existing rental developments for the purpose of keeping them affordable in perpetuity. We feel that these landlord groups, not-for-profits and cooperatives, the likelihood of rent evictions under ownership of those groups is highly unlikely. And so by removing rental buildings out of the market and into the hands of not-for-profits, we would be indirectly helping to resolve some of our rent eviction issues.
Thank you, Michelle. This last chart just broadly kind of demonstrates what potential funding model each one of these programs could fall under, what the potential costs might be, the required staffing, and the impacts that it may have on the number of tenants. So as you can see, just adjustments to our current rental licensing bylaw has a fairly low cost, low staffing requirement, and would impact roughly 4,000 rental units. Short-term rental would have a low to medium cost. Potential staffing level is kind of low to medium as well. Effort is medium, and roughly 500 rental units would be impacted by these regulations. A mid and high-rise safety inspection program would have a very high cost, high staffing requirements, but also have a large impact on roughly 12,500 units within the city. And then we've broken down the 2 options to address rent evictions. First one, implementing a rent eviction bylaw, would kind of have a medium cost, medium staffing, and we're estimating roughly 30. But again, as Michelle spoke to, it's hard to get an accurate estimate on how many rent evictions are happening in the city right now. And then the last option, the alternate approach, again, has about the same cost, doesn't require a lot of staffing, and would have impacts on really all of our available rental units in the city. That's all for the presentation. We're open to questions.
Great, thank you so much to both you, Grant and Michelle, and I know Tanya is here as well to answer questions. So council questions, starting with Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I'm just hoping to clarify a couple of things. Can you go back to the slide with the chart of possible actions? It was your slide just before this thank you slide. Yeah, okay, that's great. So just a couple of things I want to clarify. So in our current bylaw, we talk about unit or buildings that are 4 units or more are not part of this bylaw. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, so we define an apartment under the current bylaw as units or buildings with 4 units or more with an interconnecting hallway of 2 or more stories. So there is situations where there is properties that would have more than 4 units, but not having an interconnected hallway that would be captured by the bylaw.
Okay, so that helps me understand a potential impact for fourplexes. It would not, generally speaking, it would not likely impact fourplexes.
Our current rental licensing bylaw may, depends on, again on the layout and how it's designed overall. So it's hard to say if it would or wouldn't for sure.
Okay, and then in another slide, there is a reference to 5 units or more. So is that what you would be looking at for a potential?
So we used those as the stats available to us. So just based on the parameters of of the information we have, that's how we drew the stats. It wouldn't necessarily be the cutoff. That was just what we had available to us to pull statistics from.
Okay, so it just sort of comes back to me as something that we may want to be really clear on so that we're not muddling things. If we're getting into the process of fourplexes, we have not committed ourselves to anything yet. But, you know, I think we want to have that come back as you know, something that's coherent with whatever our rental bylaw would propose.
Certainly, I think that would be part of the streamlining of the classes of license and the potential fee structure, and ensuring that we're capturing the properties we want to capture and not the ones we don't want to capture. So that would certainly be part of our review process.
Okay, thanks for that. And then the second question I have kind of refers more directly to this chart that you have up here. How many of these interventions would target more of a high-rise building rather than a smaller holding?
So the mid and high-rise inspection program would be directly targeted at those high-rise buildings. Short-term rental licensing would capture any short-term rental units located in an apartment potentially. Again, dependent on the regulations that we bring forward. And any renoviction regulations may target those types of units as well.
Okay, thank you for those clarifications.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Grant, thank you, and Tanya and Michelle for the report. It's a good update. Since we've got this slide up, I'll ask my question on this one. I'm just trying to reconcile between the chart that you've put and the recommendations that are made. So is the cost and the effort based on doing what you're suggesting in the recommendations, or is it implementing all the programs? The language is different.
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Hamner. This chart is really just meant to be a high level kind of idea of what potential costs and staffing might be. The costs and staffing are really dependent on once we do a formal review, public engagement, and draft policy or regulations, then we'd have a better idea of what the true cost might be and the true staffing requirements are dependent on where everything falls. There is potential that some of these programs are kind of combined into one regulation. They might not be standalone programs, and that could have impacts on staffing and costs as well.
So these are really just your best estimate at this stage prior to doing what you're asking us to support you doing today?
That's correct, yeah, just to kind of give a general sense of what it might be.
If we were to implement everything, your research didn't change anything for right now, this is what we would be looking at. Okay, thank you for that. My second question is around consultation. Most of your recommendations talk about continuing more research and consultation, which is great. And you call out the municipal peer review, but nothing else. So can you tell us a little bit about the consultation process and who's going to be included in the consultation as you move these forward?
Through the mayor to Councillor Hamner, I think looking at what other municipalities are doing right now is important. I think a lot of municipalities are going down the route of introducing renoviction regulations and short-term rental regulations and mid and high-rise safety programs. So understanding, you know, what they've done and the challenges they've run into and kind of the pros and cons of that. So when I'm speaking to looking at other municipalities and reviewing, that's kind of that component of it. Speaking with tenants, speaking with landlords, speaking with student groups would all be kind of part of our consultation on these bylaws, because they often have competing interests or different interests in what they want to see.
Thank you for that. It's important that we do have that well-rounded consultation, and I know a couple of our delegations coming up today are from those groups, students in particular, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanmer. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you, Grant and Michelle and Tanya. Grant, I'm not sure if you'd like to refer to Michelle for this, but I wanted to just get a little bit of a better sense of the renoviction bylaw and the potential for overlapping what already exists provincially, so with the Landlord Tenant Board and the RTA.
Through the mayor to Councillor Rowe, I might pass it to Michelle, but I think really the overlap is the potential that we're duplicating what regulations already exist through the Residential Tenancies Act, and that and there could be some legal challenges in terms of that overlap. I know in our consultation with Hamilton, that's in the process of introducing renoviction regulations. That was kind of their main concern in terms of a legal challenge, and they were careful to try not to overlap. But again, they're very similar processes, so and there is that potential there. Maybe I'll pass it to Michelle if she has anything to add.
Through the mayor to Councillor Rowe, I would only add that through our pretty high-level review at this stage, we've identified the fact that the provincial or landlord and tenant tribunal / board rules are really poorly known by both landlords and tenants. And so there's an opportunity perhaps to consider, rather than repeating enforcement of those same rules that are already in place, educating individuals about those rules so that they know their own rights and can apply them as appropriate. So there definitely is some overlap there. We're going to explore that a little bit further, but we think there may be an opportunity to use education as our primary tool about the rules that are already in place by another jurisdiction.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Rowe? Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through you, Mayor McCabe. As part of the first recommendation here in terms of reviewing our current rental housing license, I think there are a few things in here that I've heard from some residents who are landlords around the number of beds per unit, the floor area ratio. I think those are really good. Those are really good things for us to be reviewing. I'm curious whether, as part of that review, it could be scoped that we are looking at secondary suites, tertiary suites, and potentially quadplexes where the landlord is the primary resident of the property, and whether or not it is still valid for us to be requiring a rental license in those situations, given that as you alluded to earlier, the primary justifications for the rental license to be implemented was around safety and neighborhood nuisance, and I presume that those are less of a concern when it's the when the primary resident is also living in the property. So I'm curious if that might be something that is explored as part of the scope of the overall review of the rental license bylaw.
Through the mayor to Councillor Bodley. Certainly, we will consult with landlords and also tenants that are living in these types of properties. I think from a municipal enforcement perspective, we do see challenges with both owner-occupied units. We do have a separate class of license currently for owner-occupied units and non-owner-occupied units. So some of the same challenges do exist in those types of rental properties as well, but certainly getting landlords' perspective and seeing where we can make things more efficient from a licensing standpoint will be looked at as part of a review.
Did you have a follow-up? No? Any other questions from council? Thank you very much. Just one question for me, because thanks to my council colleagues, my questions were answered through the process. So it's not really a question, it's just more of a concern about some of the short-term rentals that we know exist in various neighborhoods. And, you know, when this, I had a couple of conversations with residents who live beside places that are now operating as, you know, Verbos and Airbnbs. And her question, or their question to me, the two different people that I talked to was, you know, really why are they allowed to operate? In some cases, you know, they're renting these places out sort of for weeks at a time and without any license. So, and I encouraged her to come tonight. She may be watching online, or they may be watching online. But I think that really is something that, I'm glad that's something that we're looking at through this process, because we know that there are some, I don't know how many there are currently in various neighborhoods, but I think that they're becoming more and more, the ones that are there are becoming more and more of a concern when you hear about some of the activities that are happening with people who are renting them for very short stays, like a weekend, and sometimes longer stays for 2 or 3 weeks or a month at a time. So I think that's really important that we take a good look at that and see what we can do as a municipality to you know, potentially have them follow the same kind of rules and regulations and licensing regime that other rental properties are captured with. So just wanted to make that comment, not really a question, but I'm sure that other members of council have heard from a variety of residents who have concerns about those kind of activities that are occurring. So glad that we're going to look at that through this process as well. So thank you for that. We have lost Councillor Bodley. Okay. All right. So we have the 6 recommendations in front of us. I need it. Oh, my apologies. Thank you. Oh my gosh, it's a good thing Councillor Hanmer always sits beside me here. My apologies. I know we do have 2 delegations. So thanks, Grant. Thanks to staff there. We do have 2 delegations. The first one is Teresa Nyungyen. I apologize if I've said that wrong. She's the director of Waterloo Undergraduate Student Association. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. And you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor McCabe, and thank you to Council for giving me the time to speak today. Today I'm here as one of the members of the Waterloo Undergraduate Student Association's Board of Directors, but I'm also here because I'm a second-year engineering student who, like many others at the University of Waterloo, is currently living in purpose-built rental accommodations. Today there's a heat warning in effect for the region of Waterloo, which I'm sure many in the chamber are keenly aware of. Temperatures are going to be past the 30-degree mark for most of this week. Our 2021 WUSA housing report, as I'm sure councillors are aware, found that 43% of students deal with 1 to 2 maintenance issues per term. That's heating, that's ventilation, that's poor water quality, and weathered doors and windows. And on a day like today, that's not just uncomfortable, that's dangerous. There's strong precedents from our neighboring cities in Ontario when it comes to handling building maintenance and fire safety, issues that disproportionately affect students and new tenants alike. Waterloo is one of the fastest growing municipalities in Canada, and this bylaw review gives a good basis to continue protecting and building upon tenant rights, tenant transparency, and ensuring an affordable housing market for all. While more work needs to be done, WUSA strongly supports this first step in making sure every student has a place to come home to that is safe, that is affordable, and preferably isn't 30 degrees sticky hot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and we appreciate the relationship we have with WUSA and our other post-secondary student unions, and so thank you for coming in tonight and making the time to delegate. Council, do we have any questions? Councillor Hanmer.
Through you, Mayor. Teresa, thank you very much for coming and presenting today, and I was glad to see the student voice coming forward. My question really is to you, since I did raise the question about consultation and continuing on, and I'm asking you to speak on behalf of WUSA. Will you continue to be involved in the consultation as we look at the bylaw review?
Yep, thank you for the question, Councillor Hanmer. I'm speaking this is my first term as a part of the Board of Directors, but I am very aware that WUSA has been and will continue to be part of many discussions with Council and with the region of Waterloo on topics like housing. It's something that has come up time and time again amongst students and something that we hope to continue emphasizing. So any consultations that come up, we will be an active part of for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a significant amount of work to take on while you're also studying engineering, so thank you for that. Other questions from council? Seeing none, thank you very much for the time, and I guess we'll see you at various upcoming consultations and meetings, etc. So thank you very much for making time to join us tonight.
Thank you.
Next is William Pham. Thank you for joining us tonight, William.
Thank you. Also, if I may ask, could you raise your hand when I hit 1 minute?
Sure.
Left,
Absolutely.
just so that not
Yep.
to interrupt.
Yep.
All right, I'll start. Hi, everyone. My name is William. I'm a second-year civil engineering student at the University of Waterloo, and I come to support and speak in support of the rental housing regulation review, and also call on the city to take more concrete actions to protect tenants like myself across the city, especially students at the University of Waterloo, Wilfrid Laurier, and Conestoga College. As students specifically grapple with an unaffordability crisis, it is the cost of housing that continues to be the largest monthly expense for my peers and I. As someone from Toronto, it is insane to see over $1,200 a month rent on rooms in a unit. And moving here underscores the idea that this city is the most unaffordable in the country. As I talk to Waterloo grads in the workforce, they're often flabbergasted by my $770 a month rent for a room in a house, even though it's among the cheapest in the city. Understand that this city has failed students at post-secondary institutions across the city. Lack of regulation and enforcement has created near third-world predatory conditions that students face every single day. I'll give you some examples. 330 Phillip Street, popularly known as Icon, rents and sells bedrooms that lack windows, which breaks Ontario's building code, egress window requirements for fire safety. What a big win for fire safety there. Res 1, a development with 4 buildings at 252 Phillip, consistently gives their tenants above guideline rent increases, well beyond the 2.5% prescribed for this year. You may be thinking, well, William, if this is a problem, students should report this and go to the city and go to the landlord-tenant board. Wow, that's so funny. Because understand the unique challenges we face with our 4-month work terms and that the average wait time for the LTB is 5 to 9 months. Students are among the most vulnerable tenants, and landlords across Waterloo take advantage of that. They know we don't have the time or the resources to go fight them in the LTB. And they continue to flagrantly break the law, all while the city and the region fails to enforce these bylaws. All landlords and high-rises need to be included in rental licensing. And let's get on it and make sure that our apartment buildings are safe to live in. I don't think people should be living like they currently do in places that already break the Ontario Building Code. The city needs to commit to fostering safe and sustainable development, not rooming houses that rake in millions for developers. My peers talk about genuinely unsafe living conditions, including pest, cramped conditions, and the lack of air conditioning, especially during this heat wave. And as a future civil engineer, building code violations left, right, and center. Here's a fun statistic for all of us to ponder. Guess what city doubled the percentage of people living in unsuitable housing from 2016 to 2021? If you guessed the city that this council resides in, you're right. Great job. Waterloo saw the percentage of those living in unsuitable housing nearly double from 3.9% to 5.5%, with StatCan data showing that a vast majority of them are students. Imagine living in a bedroom the size of the circle we see in front of us, with around like 4 to 5 students. How luxurious. Browsing student forums, it's literally one click away to see and find accommodation in Waterloo that's akin to factory conditions, like where I'm from in Vietnam. Some lines in the staff recommended report include increasing the permitted number of bedrooms per unit, reducing living space floor area to bedroom floor area ratios, and reviewing the minimum required per person floor area when 3+ adults share in a bedroom in Section 2A. While the spirit of these suggestions are aimed to increase affordability, they will directly harm students, especially low income and international. We need to be enforcing standards that promote healthy and dignified living, not one, as I feel like this city seems to continue to enjoy, putting more money in the pockets of developers who love to rip us off. More density is especially needed, especially North Campus in Waterloo, around Northfield Station, and around the Ion in general. The city needs to be ambitious with the targets set out in your official plan, and commit to strengthening MTSA legislation. Planning practices that could be considered, including reduced parking minimums around transit stops and the university. A more inclusionary zoning, and a commitment to fast-track affordable housing, like developing city land, like my home city of Toronto, with Create2. We are in a housing crisis, and this city and council needs to act like it. Take advantage that this city has the top planning and civil engineering departments in the country. I'm standing here and I'm begging you to take concrete actions to protect us student renters, and ensure we live in dignified living conditions, and to increase sustainable development around stations and institutional areas. I know I will graduate and unfortunately leave this unaffordable city long before concrete action is taken. But this is for my children, my grandchildren, and for your great-grandchildren, who will benefit when they choose a city for post-secondary institutions. Students are the most important and vulnerable stakeholders in this type of review, and we contribute heavily to the economy of the city and this region. So please remember our voices when making important decisions, and not just the voices of wealthy benefit landowners and developers. Thank you.
Thank you, William, for your delegation. Appreciate you coming in tonight. I do want to just a couple of comments, and it wasn't this council, but just so you're aware, and you may have not been born at the time when the city took the actions. Staff would have to remind me, probably close to 20 years ago, or maybe not quite, 15 to 20 years ago, to create the area that we call Northdale, because we recognized as a city that has 2 post-secondary institutions and a growing third one, that we needed to address the need for more student housing in Waterloo. And so we are the only city in Canada who took those actions to make special policy areas years ago to enable the building of private and institutional housing units, student housing units, purpose-built. So the city certainly has taken bold steps years and years ago. We continue to do that. We know that the students are a very important part of our community. We want them to be safe. We want them to have a good experience while they're here, and we hope that they find a career and an opportunity to stay in our city. But I do take a little issue with the fact that you're saying and that we haven't done anything. The city, we have the most. We're a mid-sized city of 150,000 people. We have the highest amount of student rental housing in all of Canada. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. We know that there's challenges out there. We're one of the few cities that does have a rental housing program licensing regime, because we do want to ensure that students are safe and other people who rent are safe in our community. We know that there's challenges out there. I mean, that is why we do work through our Town and Gown Committee. We work with, in collaboration and consultation with groups like WUSA and their counterparts at Laurier and Conestoga to have these conversations. And that is really, the issues that you outlined are really why we're here tonight. With staff doing this kind of work and bringing these kind of recommendations forward. And I would just finally note that, the universities and the colleges have a significant responsibility to house the students that they are welcoming, that they are bringing in to study in our community. And we're glad that the University of Waterloo has, after years, is building a new residence. That's a big part of it as well. Laurier is taking some actions as well, and Conestoga recently has as well. But these are things that have happened over the past year, and the lack of new student residents coming into the city has contributed to this challenge. So this is a complex issue. There's multiple players in the who need to work together collaboratively to address this. And I just wanted to let you know that the city, as I said, has taken action over the last number of years and is continuing to work on this issue. So with that said, and I'm just looking to council to see if people had any questions. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through you, Mayor McCabe. This is a question for staff, but it might lead back to a question to the delegate, so I'm hoping I'll be afforded the opportunity to ask staff first. Okay, so the delegate here highlighted like a particular challenging loophole with the provincial legislation around the landlord-tenant board, right? Like when you're talking about people who are living in the city for 4 months at a time, off for co-op somewhere else, coming back, and also living their lives, studying, contributing to the vibrancy of our community, et cetera. It's dealing with all of the challenges that I know all of us who attended post-secondary here in the city of Waterloo know about, to then also expect them to understand, even through whatever potential education that we are proposing on the landlord-tenant board, and then wait in line for 5 to 9 months. I could see why someone like William might see that as not worth it. Or not a priority in their life. Is there any advocacy that we should be doing to the provincial government around the landlord-tenant board that specifically speaks to student housing in our community?
Ms. Papke, you look like you wanted to take that question? Thanks very much.
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Bodley, that is definitely, I think, a very appropriate consideration because those timelines are proving very challenging. Our staff that deal with the property standards issues and some of those landlord-tenant relationships, that wait period is a very challenging and something that we're not able to control.
And if I may, part of my ignorance here as a follow-up through you, Mayor McCabe, are there provisions in the Landlord-Tenant Board, that Landlord-Tenant Act, that speak specifically to student housing, or is it all the same, whether it's rental or?
Through you, Mayor McCabe, to Councillor Bodley, I'm not 100% sure. I don't think there is a specific to students, but I'm not an expert in that legislation and would have to actually follow up and check with our legal division about that too.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And just, I don't know that I have I know I said I might have a question for you, William, after that. But I just wanted to empathize with the plight that you're in when you're talking about, if we at the city go through this process and it comes back to us that, the main thing that we're going to do on LTB issues is related to education. I could certainly appreciate your frustration that's not enough, and that more needs to be done. I don't know necessarily to the commentary that staff have made around legalities and what we could do within the Municipal Act. But I appreciate you highlighting that for me today, and it's on my mind when we think about advocating up to the higher order levels of government around what can be done to improve the situation for student tenants in particular. So thank you for coming in tonight, William.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley. Other comments or questions? Councillor Rowe.
Through you, Chair. William, thank you for coming in. As a Ward 6 councillor, University of Waterloo is in my ward, and I wanted to assure you that I hear the students, I know the other members of council do, we work with WUSA, we work with staff, we have meetings to discuss these issues, and I know that the timeline isn't as short as we would like it to be as well to work through these issues, but we do understand and we are listening. I also wanted to ask you, if you don't mind me asking, are you living in a low rise, high rise? What type of building is your place of residence?
Yeah, I'm thankful to live in like a house. So I live in a house around Hazelton, Columbia. So it's much better conditions than a lot of what my friends experience, which is like genuinely horrifying. And I think it would disgust many council members here.
Yes, and as I've said, I specifically as well have talked to students where there are 7 students living in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. So we are hearing overcrowding and we're hearing those issues. So we are hearing you. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Other questions from council? Yeah, Councillor Wright.
Just a comment, and this is just about context and how much things can change in a 10-year period. It was literally in 2015 when this council, not this exact elected council, but Waterloo Council had a report from Town and Gown about there being a glut of student housing. And so in 10 years, we've gone from way too much to none at all. And that's really a product of extraordinary conditions. And it's obviously something that merits an emergency response. Thanks.
Thank you. Was that a comment, not a question to staff? Okay, all right. But yeah, that's interesting, as you said. So seeing no other questions, thanks very much, William, for your time and coming in tonight. And so speaking so passionately about this, like I said, we know we've done a lot. We know there's more to do, and this is exactly why this type of report is before us tonight. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Council, any other comments or questions about the recommendations or the report itself? Seeing none, there are 6 recommendations. There's 6 recommendations before us. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Hanmer. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, and thank you to the delegates who came in tonight, and also to the staff who've worked on this. And we look forward to the updates and the work in the very near future. Okay, so moving on to the rest of the agenda, there are no notice of motions. There are no consideration of notice of motions. There are no notice of motions. There are no communications and correspondence. There's no unfinished business. Council, are there any questions? Seeing none. New business. There is a reminder that there is a regional all-council meeting this Friday at 2 o'clock. There are hybrid options and in-person options. Those are always very important discussions, and this Friday's is about ongoing information sharing around the, it's the Better Care Together, what's the, sorry. Building the future of care together, and also, and part of the discussion is around the proposed mergers of the hospitals, so that interesting and important information for us to be aware of, as well as changes to the waste management strategy, also very important. So I need a motion sorry, moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Hanmer. All right, all in favor? It's just, yeah, thank you, that is carried. It's because we'll all be gathered there, either in person or online. Enactment of the bylaws. Oh, sorry, okay, is there other new business? Right, okay, Councillor, I was trying to slide past that.
Right.
Sorry. Trying to give Rick a break.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that World Refugee Day Waterloo Region takes place this Saturday at the museum from 2 to 4 p.m., where we will be recognizing and honoring newcomers who've contributed to Waterloo Region, as well as volunteers who've helped newcomers settle in Waterloo Region and make it a more inclusive community. And the second half of that event is a walk with refugees from the museum to the Multicultural Center, where we will be listening to experiences of refugees, and also the YMCA newcomer youth will be doing spoken word, etc. on the way. So anyone who would like to join us would be more than welcome. It's a fantastic event recognizing and elevating the presence of refugees and their contributions to our region.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. I know you've done a lot of work on those issues for many, many years, so thank you for that. Other new business council wants to talk about? Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, Mayor McCabe. I just wanted to highlight that the Friends of Waterloo Park hosted a summer start event at the park this week. It was really great. There was live music. We were giving away trees and lots of other fun stuff at the park. So it was really really great to see, and the park was super vibrant and jumping with all sorts of activities. So it was really great. And just thanks to the Friends of Waterloo Park for hosting that event.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wright.
Thanks. I just want to note a couple of Pride-related activities that took place this past week. So there was Spectrum's fundraising gala at the Regional Museum. It was a sold-out affair, and it was great fun. They had a lineup of comedians who kept it very salty. And that was followed by a street party on Princess Street, hosted by Cowboys and Angels to support Spectrum and to mark Pride. And just a last item that I want to note too. So the Canadian Music Association just had their Ontario Awards, and we have a number of local residents who were recipients. Shane Goose, who happens to be my son's fiddle teacher, he was awarded the inaugural Musician of the Year award. And there's a local record producer too, Sean Moore, who was record producer of the year. So Waterloo was coming out strong in music just this past weekend.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Vasek.
Through you, Mayor McCabe, following along the music lines, I had a chance to go to the Grand River Black Music Festival and Conference this past weekend. Teenage Jen was very excited to see Julie Black, and I literally am just completely blanking on his name. Oh my goodness. Not Choclair. It wasn't, no. In any case, it was a really great conference, and it highlighted and celebrated Black music, and also spoke to some of the challenges of that Black musicians face. And I got a sneak peek of Hip Hop Hope, which is a documentary about local hip hop and DJ scene and culture, and the official opening is tomorrow. So a super event to celebrate last weekend, I think. Thanks.
Do you want to round this out, Councillor Hanmer? No, okay. Oh, Councillor Rowe has another.
I just wanted to mention that Carson Kressley was in town for the Queen's Own Princess, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah. And I did meet him, and I had no idea who he was, so that shows you how uncool I am. And I'll just mention that on June 21st, this Friday, is also National Indigenous Peoples Day. Where we need to continue to recognize and celebrate the history and the resilience and the diversity of First Nations, Inuit, Métis people in Canada and in our community. So that's my contribution to upcoming new business. Enactment of the bylaws. Councillor Bodley, moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Hanmer. All in favor? That is unanimous. Adjournment. Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Vasek. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.